Hello and welcome to another episode of Statford Bridge Chelsea by the numbers. Today's numbers 1-1. Chelsea draw away at Old Trafford, place we have not won since 2012. But this was a decent result in what was a quite poor performance. And ultimately, I think one of the funniest or weirdest things about this game is that Chelsea played pretty terribly, in my opinion. I thought they were very loose and did not accomplish the things that they generally look to do in possession. They didn't do a great job of getting numbers into the box. They didn't do a great job of turning what was truly a tremendous amount of high-quality final third entries into high-quality box entries and high-quality chances. Chelsea only put up 1.1 expected goals. Half of that is one header off of a corner. I thought the wingers all had very poor games. I thought the fullbacks didn't have great games going forward. I thought Chelsea were pretty comfortable playing through, but not great at turning the playing through into good stuff. And some of that is because United played well, and I thought specifically their defenders had very good games. Putting all of that aside, Chelsea were pretty comfortable somewhere that they have played very poorly in recent seasons. Manchester United away was probably the worst performance of Mauricio Pochettino's Chelsea. Maybe Arsenal away was around the same kind of vein. But it was a very, very difficult place for Chelsea to come play. And they played terribly and still come out to something like an XG draw if you take away the penalty in the moment of madness of the penalty. And if we look at the stats kind of overall, it's a +1 shot difference game. Chelsea give up like some pretty juicy transitions without giving up a tremendous amount of volume. They win the box touch battle pretty significantly, 30-22, which is funny because that was not those numbers earlier. It was 24 and 20 earlier. Shots inside the box is 8-8. Like, it's a pretty even game, which you're going to take. Chelsea were quite good on the set piece front, which was a nice adjustment. And it is kind of what it is. Like, I think it's very tempting, given we went out to Newcastle midweek, and that the game was like fairly helter-skelter and like didn't feel comfortable as much as like United really didn't get anything that good, and neither did Chelsea. It's fairly tempting to kind of get out over our skis about this, but like it's fine. It's +1 point on last year. It is what it is. And if we look at kind of the year-over-year comparisons, I'll change these to 30 and 22 live because I'm a bad podcaster. Like, compared to last year, it's an even expected goal difference versus a -2. You get the point instead of losing. The XG is about the same. The XGA is way better. You have a positive shot difference and don't concede 27 shots like last year. You have a positive box touch difference. Like, these things are meaningful improvements. And really, that's kind of the game, is that Chelsea are somewhat better than last year, and that's where it is. But I want to talk about one tactical thing in this game specifically, because I think it's like the tactical thing to talk about this. And I know this is an analytics podcast, but we've got the tactical board out. So if you're only listening, this is going to be hard to follow, but I'll do my best. The big thing that happened in this game, and has happened the last couple games, is that Cole Palmer started as the left 10. And I liked this decision, right? Like, the reasons I've stated previously are that I think it keeps him away from Madueke. I think it makes Chelsea much more balanced in terms of their width on the pitch. And I think it opens up opportunities when it's not Neto playing as the winger. Like, if it's Sancho or Mudryk, it opens opportunities for you play the right-footed left winger who dribbles inside, and Palmer makes the run into the channel, and he's on his left foot when he arrives there, which I think is really valuable. In this game, what we saw was United loaded up so heavily on Cole Palmer to the point where when Chelsea would build on the left-hand side, Palmer would rotate, he would roll out, right? We've talked about this, where the 10s end up in wide areas. He would roll out, and United would bring both 6s all the way across, the 9s all the way across, the strong side winger is there, and the weak side winger, to the point that the out ball for Chelsea over and over and over again, and because Jackson is pinning both center backs, was Malo Gusto in the opposite pocket, the right 10 space. And Malo Gusto got the ball in amazing positions over and over and over again. He was one of the team's leaders in progressive passes received throughout the game, and he only played half. Consistently got into that right pocket over and over and over again, and consistently turned those very high-quality press breaks into garbage. He did not find Madueke and give his advantages to him. He did not find Jackson. He did not find Palmer. He did not drive himself. It was a lot of really terrible giveaways. And like one thing I think that has been coming up is like, well, why would a coach choose to play in such a way that Gusto is the free man? And well, I think there's like two things to consider. Is like, one, is the style of play such that you want him to be the free man, or is it that the defensive team has made decisions to limit other things, acknowledging that they will give that up, right? Like there are two teams who can make tactical choices, who decide how the game is played. Like some people were critical of Enzo Maresca for Chelsea playing very direct in behind against Brighton, when Brighton played the most insane high line of all time at the halfway line. Like, well, what else are you supposed to do? The tactical choice they made is that they're going to give you that. Against the Wolves defended extremely narrow, and the tactical choice was Chelsea get to play through the wingers. And Nani Madueke feasted that way. Crystal Palace chose to sit deep, so it was Chelsea get to play through the defensive midfielders. Like, the defensive team has somewhat more control over where the game is played than the attacking team, right? Because if you defend very deep, you get free territory to gain. If you defend very high, you give up territory in behind. If you defend narrow, you give it out wide. If you defend wide, you give it up inside. Like that is kind of how things go. So I don't think it's so much like Enzo Maresca has chosen to make Gusto and Cucurella the key breakdown guys. And specifically, I say that because in the second half, Malo Gusto went off, Marc Cucurella came on, Cole Palmer went to the right 10 space, and well, what happened? All of a sudden, the 6s are shifting the other way, United are shifting the other way, and now it was always Marc Cucurella on the other side as the free guy. And so, what do we do about this? Because on one hand, it might be easy to say, well, Marc Cucurella and Malo Gusto are good players. They will probably be better than they were today in general. But I don't think that's a great answer here. Like, I don't think this is like a finishing thing where you're like, well, it'll regress to the mean. Like, I actually think it's not a failure of your system, but I think it's certainly not a strength if you're consistently asking them to be the guy who makes plays. And so one thing, like, I'm very curious to see is, like, well, what if we see Reece James goes back to right back and he is the player in that space? Because I think Reece James, instead of Malo Gusto in that pocket, is actually an extremely dangerous player. He can drive himself because he is a threat to shoot. He can play shallow crosses to the back post. He can play through balls. He can play wide and overlap. That's one option. Though I'm not sure at this point in his career that he has the physical tools to do what is required of him, right? Like, I don't know if he can, at this point, do that job to get there and play and defend to the level. The other thing I'm quite curious is if we see, Enzo Maresca mentioned this week about, well, maybe we're going to see João Felix and Cole Palmer in the pocket together, and you end up with Gusto as the wide one, and it's João Felix here. That, to me, feels like the most natural solution. And, we're at a point now where Nani Madueke's last couple games have been not great. Like, I think it's fair to say He has 1 goal in his last 8 appearances. He has not been creating a ton in those games either. He's taken 27 shots for 2.5 XG in 700 minutes. Like, that's not a tremendous amount of volume. He's back down to a third of an expected goal. The shot volume is high, which is great, but it's just, there's not that much there. And particularly there's not that much there as a creator. So it's starting to say, okay, like, is this really how you want to play? And so I think that there's probably value in looking at, like, do we start Palmer nominally as the right winger? He comes inside, and then it's Nkunku or Felix as the other 10. That's the solution that I would like to see, particularly against Arsenal, whose fullbacks are fairly conservative. So you're not going to have to worry about, like, I think one of the things that Maresca likes about having the fullback here instead of the winger here is, like, the transition for the fullback is way shorter than if they're up here. But I think, like, the fullback doesn't go that far for Arsenal, so you can get away with it being a further distance for your fullback because they're not going to get 2v1. That, I think, is a potential solution that I would really like to see in the coming matches. But other than that was kind of the game. The only other player that I really want to talk about is Moises Caicedo. And we're not going to get into the year-over-year comparison stuff. Like, we talk about this every week, and there's enough good stuff there to say, like, we are where we are. Like, it's almost half an expected goal a game. It's 8 box touches a game difference. It's a 4 shot per game difference. The defensive stuff is clearly better compared to last year. The set piece stuff is even creeping up now. Chelsea are an above average set piece expected goal difference team, despite being one of the worst in Europe last year. It's clear at this point. But I do want to talk about Moises Caicedo. So we're going to take a short break for audio listeners. Video listeners, we're going to go straight through, and we'll continue on from there. Mr. Caicedo. Caicedo scores a very lovely volley today. And I didn't think Caicedo was spectacular today. I thought he was very active in terms of as a presser and a closer down. And, like, there are so many fouls today. Like, he has 3 fouls today, and 2 of them are, like, amazing turnover transitions if it doesn't get given. He gets into 16 ground duels because it's seemingly sometimes he's the only guy who defends in there. Like, Caicedo is really good. He is really, really, really good. And so, like, when I say I didn't think Caicedo was great today, it's like I still think him, Wesley Fofana, Reece James were comfortably Chelsea's 3 best players, even with Fofana's insane penalty giveaway, which we're not even going to talk about, or his insane moment before the penalty giveaway, which we're not going to talk about. But I think Caicedo is very comfortably one of Chelsea's 3 best players this year. And I think there's a legitimate conversation about has he been the best defensive midfielder in the Premier League this year. I think it's kind of him and Onana and nobody else. But he has been truly spectacular. Like, he is leading the Premier League in tackles and assists. He is putting up insanely high ball-winning numbers every week. He does not turn the ball over really at all, despite being a quite high-volume passer. He is passing the ball forward at a very good rate for someone with his defensive acumen. He's even putting up, like, quite decent expected assist numbers for someone who plays as deep as he does. Like, among midfielders in the broad positional group, like, he plays very deep compared to other players. The dude is really holding a lot together as a defender for Chelsea. And it really, really makes a big difference. Even picking up, like, loose balls and winning second balls, which is super important. Like, he ranks extremely highly. If we look at testing out the McClockbot scatter plots, right, which are in beta, If you look at all midfielders with more than 500 minutes in the top 5 leagues, tackles and interceptions on one axis, progressive passes on the other, there is very, very, very few players who win the ball as much as him and pass it forward as much as him. It's very funny to me that Carlos Baliba is right next to him, since Baliba was kind of his replacement. And a lot of Caicedo's is resetting possession to the center backs for them to go forward. That's fairly common. But the dude is popping. And I don't know if him and Lavia is a long-term thing. I don't think Lavia does the defensive work necessary for the role. I think he is much too loose in possession, even if he is quite evasive in the press, and I think he's quite good at turning and getting things going forward. You also see games like today where he turns the ball over 1,000,000 times in midfield unpressured. He's not an excellent forward passer. And clearly, for some reason, Enzo Fernandez is mired in the middle and refuses to pass the ball forward and play deeper to do that over and over and over again. Like Enzo Fernandez in Portugal, and when he played as a defensive midfielder, was here. He was a 10, 11, 12 progressive pass a game guy. And because he's playing so much higher, it's just he just doesn't have the juice for that. But clearly that's not going to happen. So I would be very curious to see, do Chelsea target someone to play next to Caicedo? Which is an insane thing to say when between Leslie, Enzo, Lavia, Andre, God even knows who else I'm forgetting. That's 200 million of midfielders. I do wonder if there's some appetite to get someone who is a little bit more robust defensively than Romeo Lavia there, but who can pass forward, probably a little bit better than Caicedo. But that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with the team. That's where I'm at with Moises Caicedo, who I wanted to give his flowers. He really is having an excellent season. I think there was a really good conversation on Twitter between Grace Robertson and Kim McCauley and Ted Knutson, talking about his cost and whether that's value. And the reality is, unless you're going to develop a kid into a DM, or you're going to gamble on someone as a position change, the cost for the world's best defensive midfielders is 100 million. That's the cost. It is what it is. Lest we forget, Liverpool offered the exact same amount of money at the deadline. So I think we can kind of push the cost things aside, but Moises Caicedo has been truly excellent for Chelsea this season, and I think that this midfield would be extremely ropes if he were ever to go down for any meaningful amount of time. But that's where we're at. Chelsea draw United, +1 to the chasing pack. My model has it at something like 70, 69, 61 between them, Villa and Spurs. Chelsea coming up, have Arsenal next weekend, and then Leicester, Villa, Southampton, Spurs. And you're looking at that 5-game stretch. And last year Chelsea take 8 points from the equivalent, and you look at it this year, and I think the goal for me is probably something like 11. Can you take 3 wins, 2 draws? I'd be fine with something like 10, right? But I think there's scope there for Chelsea to do something. And critically looking at the Champions League race, it's looking at the Spurs and looking at the Villa and saying, Chelsea took 6 from 6 against Spurs last year, which is huge for the table. If that turns to 2 from 6 and 2 draws, that's a big swing. That's -4 for Chelsea. It's +2 for Spurs. That's a big swing in the table. So I think this next 5 games, really this whole stretch from Liverpool to Spurs, which is pretty brutal for Chelsea, but I think this is going to have a big, big bearing on Chelsea's season. And again, I talked about this today, but Chelsea are 4th through 10 games with the 3rd hardest schedule in the league, and they play Arsenal next weekend to put them to either the 1st or 2nd hardest schedule in the league. You look at the back half, kind of before we hit the halfway mark. You have Everton, you have Fulham, you have Brentford, who've just been okay. You have Southampton, you have Leicester. You really got to put away. You have Ipswich. You really got to put away the newly promoted teams. Critical. You really have to go 9 for 9 from those. And you got to start racking up the wins. Like, you look at this stretch around Christmas time, Fulham, Ipswich, Palace, Bournemouth, like, that's another one. Like, can you put 12 from 12 there and really start putting points on the board? But that's where we're going to wrap it here. Nice little short one. FK Noah in the Europa League on Thursday. There will be a stream for that one. I'm off work that day, which will be fun. And we'll see from there. No stream next weekend. There will be pods after both. Probably a little bit later for the Arsenal one. But let's see. A draw away to United. We must be in quite a privileged position that we can be upset about a draw away to United. Anyways, if you're enjoying the pods, if you're enjoying the streams, if you're enjoying the videos, throw a like, throw a subscribe, throw a retweet, a comment, whatever. Share it around. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if there's things you like or don't like, or things you want to talk about that aren't getting talked about, or you want to talk about, hit me up. And hopefully you were able to see all the stats and all the whiteboard. Shut up, Bad Rabbits, who told me that I was a dummy and half of it was off my screen. We're getting better. We're improving slowly but surely. Anyways, that's all. As always, enjoy the soccer.